All right, welcome back to What's in a Game. I'm Will Jones here with Grace Jean after some interesting rumors were released last night. So, how are you doing in regards to everything, Grace?
How am I doing? Oh, I don't know. I'm traveling for the holidays. I'm watching basketball games. I'm having big consequential articles about trade rumors swirling in the middle of said basketball games. I'm just out here trying to stay warm. I maybe spent a little bit too much time arguing with people online, but what else is new?
Well, we have. Oh, so for programming notes, just really quickly before we jump into all this, obviously Christmas is around the corner, so everyone's going to be, busy with the holidays. But there are important games on Christmas, of course. So we will be back sometime after Christmas to discuss the Nuggets games versus the Suns, of course, on the 23rd and then on Christmas Day itself. And we'll jump into it and see where the trade rumors are at that time as well.
See where the team is.
Yeah, yeah, all that stuff. Who knows? Yeah, I saw your comment on Twitter where you said, contrary to your profile picture on Twitter, which is the Elmo chaos
The
picture for those
Chaos
who
Elmo with the
haven't,
flames, yeah.
you said, I enjoy chaos except for when my team's involved. So I feel the same way. Like trade deadline's exciting and thinking about different players and playing on different teams and what that might look like. But when it's your own team, it's can be complicated. But yeah, let's go to the Nuggets specifically because during the NBA Cup final, news came out of The Athletic from Tony Jones and Sam Amick about the Nuggets' interest in Zach LaVine's market and some others, which we'll go over. And of course, that means those players with those contracts, in order to get them, MPJ would be on the trade block. I think it started slowly trickling into Nuggets Nation that there's a reality that MPJ could be leaving in a trade at some point during this deadline. It's not guaranteed, of course. We'll talk about whether that's a good idea or not. But the fact that even this is being seriously reported, and in that report said that the Nuggets had preliminary talks already, means that it's happening. It's not like, uh, I mean, it wasn't saying there was serious discussions like a deal's imminent or anything. So, you
Right.
never
I
know.
don't know
But
what preliminary trade discussions even means. What the difference between expressed interest in or have had preliminary trade discussions even means. But the article lists a bunch of people that apparently Denver has been looking at. Just for context, right? This article came out in the Athletic, and like you said, it was same Sam Amick, along with Tony Jones, who's the Athletic's new Nuggets beat writer. He covers both the Nuggets and the Jazz, and so he has sources of his own within the org as well. But it seems like a lot of the sourcing for this article came from quote unquote league sources. And, we can talk a little bit about what it sounds like, where it sounds like some of this information is coming from. But did you want to talk about how the bulk of the article went over LaVine first?
I kind of wanted to just start with the MPJ angle of it before we get
Yeah,
into
sure.
any ideas of who the best fit might be for us, and even if and if we even want this to happen or what you think about it.
Yeah.
But the first thing everyone thinks with MPJ, if you're a Nuggets fan, that you're going to be emotional about it, you'll be sentimental. MPJ was a very unknown prospect when we drafted him. We kind of took a flyer on him because of his health. He bought into his
Well, I mean, he was
role.
known, but like his ability to
Unknown whether he
play
would be good.
basketball in the NBA was unknown because of the health factors. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just like a great story. I remember just watching MPJ like make his first start and being excited to watch him, and seeing him grow over his career with the Nuggets has been really awesome to see. And we won a championship with him. So of course fans are attached to him. He's been like more and more professional as time goes on. And so the first just thing about it is that it sucks. It's a lot of fans are not excited about the prospect of trading MPJ. So with that out
Can
of
I
the way,
just
yeah.
can I just interrupt you really quickly?
Hmm.
You going over the sort of like brief highlights of, MPJ's time in Denver. It reminds me of those montages that happen in a TV show right before a character gets killed off, where like all the people in their lives are like remembering their best moments with them, and you just know you're like, oh no, they're totally about to kill X character
Oh
off. And
yeah,
I'm like, oh my gosh, I
I know.
can't.
It is like that. I honestly don't know how likely it is or not, but I mean, we talked about it in multiple past episodes, like the last 3 episodes, how MPJ is the most likely to be sent away because the financial reality and just the only way to get trades done like this is to trade MPJ, sadly. So if I don't know if fans are confused about that because the idea that we would trade MPJ, who's playing really well, doesn't make sense to them because he's not really the problem with the team, right? And so it doesn't
Right.
make sense to trade MPJ, but it's the
It's also
only
true that you don't normally trade the thing that's the problem because they tend to be at
yeah.
the player is at the nadir of their value. And if you don't want to, basically get fleeced in negotiations, you wait until they're like higher in their value. So it's kind of in a way
Mhm.
always antithetical to, the logic you might think when it comes to like what you would want to
Trading.
do on the one side of a trade.
Yeah, I know it's always both teams are getting stuff that they think's going to help them and probably getting some stuff that might be some downsides. Like it's
Yeah.
there's rarely I mean, there's of course slam dunk trades where someone flees someone and all that. Like, the Nuggets trading for Aaron Gordon and sending out RJ Hampton and Gary
Yeah,
Harris. Not that Gary's
that was
bad,
for
but
sure.
we were emotional about Gary Harris back then too, but AG ended up being amazing. And I think some people even were questioning AG's fit at the time, even though I was personally excited about that. And I've seen Ryan Blackburn even float the idea with Zach LaVine that, Nuggets fans may not see the whole vision with LaVine coming in and he could play a different kind of role than they expect, kind of like AG. That's like the wishful thinking side of it if the LaVine
I
trade
did
goes
see
through.
Ryan Blackburn compare Zach LaVine to Aaron Gordon in that particular way. I
Yeah.
I disagree with that comparison myself because I think there are like vastly different fit concerns than there were with AG, but maybe
hmm
that's just me speaking in hindsight because I was not part of the fan base before the Nuggets got AG.
Yeah, with AG, it was more. I think he was playing in a way that wasn't suiting him on the Magic, right? And so when he comes here, he gets to play a role that's better suited to him. Whereas with Zach LaVine, I don't know that there's like an obvious use case where that is the same thing, right? Because it's like, how is he being used in Chicago where he'd be used differently in Denver?
He might be used like the same way, which is fine.
Yeah.
We can get into like the specifics of the Levine deal, but was there more that you wanted to say about MPJ before we did that?
Just that I think if you're a fan and if you think we can win the title with this roster, then, we don't need to make a trade and
I mean, lots
whatever.
of fans don't think that that's the case, right?
Yeah,
Like
right.
these rumors wouldn't even be swirling if the Nuggets had. I mean, we talked about on our last show. Like I really quote tweeted it and I said, "As a doom time, like what's
Yeah.
going on with the team?" And we went through, all these different problems that they've been having, right?
Yeah.
And it like this is the thing with like winning cures all ills. Obviously, they're on a 3-game win streak right now. We're going to talk about that, but they were really struggling before that, and they've started this like people can cite, and I have cited the record to start the season all they want and how it's not that different from the last 2 years. But the team looks different in some pretty important qualitative and quantitative ways. And it's pretty clear there are particular areas where they are even still struggling, and we'll talk about that, even if some aspects have picked up over the last few games.
Yeah, and so I mean, let's just kind of break down the options just quickly. It's like
Hmm.
either you are confident in what the Nuggets are doing and think they can get it together and win a title with this roster, or you admit that the roster needs some changes. And
Big
so,
ones, right? Because there are marginal moves that we've talked about that they could do. But
yeah,
if you're talking about, obviously, if you're talking about trading somebody that's part of the core, like you think they need big changes.
and even with the marginal moves, I think they're extremely difficult to execute. I mean, like with the contracts and making the trade work even for Zach LaVine, like you need a Jalen Pickett or like
There
those
you go.
the other small contracts to get the money to match.
Right.
So it's
And you
like
need a
it's
team that's
difficult.
willing to take those guys on. Like
Yeah, and
I'm not
it's
blind to that fact. And it's
yeah,
annoying that we were sold a false bill of goods about flexibility this summer,
yeah,
only to not have any flexibility to make moves on the margins and be left with a platter of only the biggest possible moves are available to you in a way that I think looks like a panic move.
Yeah, well, so it's like you need to use those smaller contracts to even match a trade, and then, but that's difficult because does a team even have the roster spots to take those many players to get the money to match the trade? So it's just that's the whole idea is that it's difficult for the Nuggets to even execute a trade, which is why MPJ is the pathway because he has a $35 million contract, and you want to get actual contributors. They're going to cost money, and we only have big money to move. That's just how the
Sure.
contracts of these teams are constructed. So for just
Well, we only have big money that is like that other teams would be willing to take on. The small money contracts we have, other teams don't want.
yeah, exactly. So you got to use that's the little silver lining of if you move MPJ is you probably include a Zeke, you probably include some other people. So you could get back some players and maybe some roster spots are freed up. I don't know exactly how a trade would shake out, but that could be some of what we could see happen. So it's just if you agree at all that the Nuggets need a roster change or anything, MPJ is going to have to be traded. And so that's just the reality of it, whether you like it or not. So you can
I don't like
say,
it, for the record.
okay. So it's like we can wait out this season and keep MPJ on the team, keep the roster together. But it's like, what is the result of that going to be? And are fans willing to accept that?
I mean, I don't think they care what fans are willing to accept because we were upset last trade deadline when they did nothing with the backup center situation.
Oh yeah,
And
they don't care. But I'm just saying, I'm talking to the fans right now. I'm just saying,
well, I know, but I mean, I'm speaking for the fans also, right? It's like, are fans willing to accept that? I don't think the front office cares what fans are willing to accept because they didn't really care when they didn't do anything last trade deadline. They didn't really care when they let KCP walk in free agency. Um, they apparently don't care now when they're letting all these trade rumors leak out. Like whether you're going to do the deal or not, letting all of these trade rumors leak out in the middle of the season is, not good. Matt Moore was saying something the other day, I think it was on Locked On Nuggets, where he talked about how the Spurs, like, they just don't even call about anybody unless they 100% want somebody because they
yeah,
don't looks obviously this information doesn't necessarily come out from your own front office, and we didn't talk about that part of the article, but I think most of the information is coming from sources around the league from all kinds of front offices that have gotten calls from the Nuggets, and everyone is making it sound like the Nuggets are kind of hair on fire, calling everybody, trying to figure out if anybody is willing to take anything for anything. Like they're just trying to make a move to make a move, is what it sounds like from all the reports, not just this one, where they are like panicked about this roster. And like, I get it, but it's also like you literally built this roster.
yeah.
So I'm just kind of like, what are we doing right now?
I mean, you can see it as panicking, but also, I mean, that's a great order of business if you're the Spurs. Like, don't call unless you want someone. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of names and a lot of teams included in this article, so it
Yeah,
paints a
why don't you go over some of the names that they said have.
sure.
I'll just like read this quick, the opening quote. The Nuggets have either expressed interest in or have had preliminary trade discussions on the following players. Take it away.
Okay, so we got Jordan Poole with the Wizards, and also included in that was Jonas Valanciunas. You got the Jazz's Jordan Clarkson, and then the Atlanta Hawks, DeAndre Hunter, and company. Like any player on the Hawks besides Trae Young and such could be available in something with a deal for MPJ. And then Brooklyn, of course, Cam Johnson, and anyone on the Nets around him as well.
All right. And
So
obviously Zach LaVine, who's the
and
main
then yeah,
focus of this
Zach LaVine
particular
with the
article.
Bulls. So it paints the picture that Booth's been calling around and surveying. It could just be like calling and saying, "Hey, like where are you at on these guys? Are they available?" And then those front office people and sources are reporting, "Yeah, the Nuggets called and asked about this guy." That could be literally all it is. I don't know where Booth stands. My thing is it is a bit of a panic trade by definition because you're admitting, hey, the roster's not good enough, so we need to make a trade now.
You're
But
admitting that the roster that you built isn't good enough. So I'm supposed to trust you to make another big move.
yeah, but at the same time, there's only one. Well, there's only one trade that the Nuggets can make it, and that is MPJ plus Zeke plus people.
Or MPJ plus whatever plus people. Or because you talked about turning MPJ into multiple players. But when it comes to the Zach LaVine deal, they're talking about doing the opposite. They're talking about a consolidation trade to turn a top-heavy roster into a more top-heavy roster that has
a like 1-for-1 MPJ for LaVine wouldn't be
you
like a
can't
great
do a
idea.
1-for-1
Yeah.
because LaVine makes more money than MPJ. So you'd
So it
have
would
to
be
aggregate. And it would have to be MPJ and Zeke. Yeah.
which
And potentially a pick,
is
which
debatable.
I would be very against, but it is debatable, but it's also like, I mean, in a vacuum, like Zach LaVine is a better player than MPJ, right? Because they talk a lot in this article about how the Nuggets are really concerned with adding wing scoring and on-ball creation. If MPJ was a better shot creator on the ball, like this wouldn't be, in the discussion. Like, I'm not blind to that. He's definitely not a good shot creator on the ball. He's not like someone who you can put the ball in his hands and he can go get you a bucket, right? He has to get everything off the ball. And even off ball, like he has some limitations. We've talked about how, he struggles sometimes off of, certain DHOs, and he's like not really great off of screens unless he's coming off ball screens. Versus like, I don't even know what to call this, but it's like an on-ball screen is like a little bit different because you're coming off of the same screen where you're getting the ball, like whatever. MPJ has some struggles in that because he has limits to, his own body's like flexibility in certain ways, and he doesn't always have his feet set and, this and that. That's just true, right? So if you're looking for more on-ball creation, it would make more sense to try to get it on the wing. My issue with a LaVine trade in particular is that, one, like I said, you're making the roster more top heavy, and yes, you're consolidating Zeke. So it's like, yeah, we're getting off of Zeke's money. Yay. But you're turning Zeke's money plus MPJ's money into another player that you're not going to be able to move. And so you're locking yourself into a certain roster build, which is Jamal plus Zach LaVine. Because I'm telling you right now, look at how much to do Chicago has gone through to try to move Zach LaVine. And we don't even know if they're going to be able to move Zach LaVine this year, right? Like this is not a deal that's gone through. It's rumored interest that the Nuggets may have had, or maybe some preliminary trade discussions, right? Jamal has not had Zach LaVine's regular season production, and he has more years left on his max contract than Zach LaVine does. He's not going anywhere, okay? So if we get Zach LaVine, we are in effect committing to the build of a Jamal Murray, Zach LaVine backcourt for the remainder of Nikola Jokic's prime, which I am very much not a fan of. And I say locked in. It's different if you were getting, if LaVine was like on an expiring deal. I still don't love that, but maybe you'd be able to extend him at a smaller number, and then he'd be like more movable in the future if and when that particular build doesn't work out particularly defensively. But he's got more years left on his deal. He's got, I think it's the same number of years as MPJ actually. So this year plus 2 more, including the player option at the end of the deal, which means that that's the build that you're going to be locked into for the next like at least 2.5 years. And who knows if you extend him after that, I don't know. But at least for that, and then you have to consider that Jamal's 4-year deal starts next season. You won't be able to move either of those contracts. The reason that we would get LaVine is because Chicago is trying to offload him, right?
Yeah, I do think you can still trade Jamal, but it would be tough.
I don't, because look at how difficult it is to trade Zach LaVine.
I know, but
with less money on the deal. And look, you can include picks and do all that. I'm not saying that you can't, but you're going to get fleeced in that deal, is what I'm saying.
I'm just saying you're not necessarily.
You're either not going to trade him or you're going to get fleeced in that deal.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's scary either way. You're essentially locked in, and then you have to do some drastic shit to get out
That's
of it.
the thing is, like, they decided when they extended Jamal this summer, and like I don't blame them for this. They had no choice when they extended Jamal this summer to the max deal, right? They could have tried to get a smaller number. There was no reporting that they were trying to get a smaller number. There was reporting that they were trying to get stipulations that I'm like, what does this even do? They, in effect, committed themselves to Jamal as part of the backcourt. If they do this deal and trade MPJ for Zach LaVine, they are committing themselves for the next 2 to 3 years, which could be the remainder of Nikola Jokic's prime. We don't know how much longer his prime is going to last, although he's just like on this ridiculous trajectory, as we'll get to in our last segment. You're committing to that backcourt. You're committing to a Jamal Murray, Zach LaVine backcourt alongside Nikola Jokic, who is not a good rim protector, and in effect recreating maybe a better version because you have Jokic, maybe a worse version because the backcourt's, equal to not as good as the CJ Dame Portland Trailblazers, who ranked where defensively over the course of that tenure.
Yeah, it was a massive issue.
Yeah. And it's not even that I don't think both of these guys can't lock in defensively. You look at a team like the Cleveland Cavaliers, and this is part of the reason that I don't ever fully believe in the Cavs, even though they've kind of solved some of their offensive issues. They get into a playoff series with the Boston Celtics, and Tatum and Brown are just going to pick them apart on the wing, because as much as Mobley and Jarrett Allen can cover for Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland, a locked in Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland, with their interior presence, which the Nuggets do not have, right? Because you're building a team around Nikola Jokic. You cannot hide those guys in the playoffs. And they are getting picked on by bigger wings constantly and consistently. And even if you can have two guards who are not particularly defensively oriented and try to get them to lock in on defense and be good and solid and just have them be steady, but you're never going to have, then you're not going to have somebody, except we can talk about what would happen with the small forward position on the Nuggets. You're not going to have multiple players who can actually bother the other team's best perimeter players, right? Because there's a difference between being solid on defense and being disruptive and being impactful.
Yeah, and then
we're kind of seeing Giannis. We're going to talk about this with the with the Bucks. Giannis has to go claiming some old glory days God mode on defense to make up for a Dame Gary Trent Jr. backcourt on defense.
Yeah, and the Nuggets are not like that. So.
Right. We have AG, but AG's not Giannis. That's just a fact, right? Jokic is definitely not Giannis defensively. Or Brook Lopez, right? Because the Bucks have both of those guys that can at least kind of mimic what Cleveland is doing and sort of making up for the the shortcomings of their backcourt defensively. And even the Bucks, eventually they're we got to start Andre Jackson Jr. to make up for some of this stuff on the perimeter. But it's just and the other thing is okay, maybe this doesn't work, and then we could try to pivot away from it. The way that you go about this, where you trade MPJ, consolidate his and another deal for a bigger contract that's going to be difficult to move alongside Jamal, that's a contract that I am as certain as any contract. I'm almost as certain as Nikola Jokic is not going to be moved, that Jamal Murray is not going to be moved for at least 3 years of his deal. Okay. You are locked in. And so you remove flexibility from yourself in going through with this kind of deal. So I feel very strongly this is a bad idea to do right now. If you're trading MPJ for a star that you're not going to be able to pivot off of, it should be a home run fit, not just with Jokic, but with the other players on your roster that you're stuck with, i.e. Jamal Murray.
Yeah, it's not like he's a AG where you're super happy with him being on the Nuggets for this foreseeable future. And obviously we extended him. But yeah, you are we already have problems with the roster flexibility because we're so top heavy. So you're just adding more to it. So it's a very good point. Yeah. And there's basketball concerns too, which you touched on for sure. Just real quick before I comment on that.
I mean, you can talk about some of the good stuff too, because offensively, I think Zach LaVine could obviously add more on-ball creation on the wing, and having two good on-ball creators in Jamal and Zach together could be really nice. We're going to talk about how some of that has looked when it's Russell Westbrook and Jamal. Not that I think that's necessarily sustainable, but it shows you part of the model, and we had that when we had Bruce and Jamal.
Yeah, and I think in regards to Calvin Booth making a move, I just think like I said, I mean, MPJ is the only person you can trade just to make a trade happen. It's not that we want to trade him. It's just the reality and the financial
If you're trying to make a big trade, yes. If you're trying to trade anything for more than $13 million, then yes.
But the question is then who are you getting back? And that is the decision that I get people not trusting Booth with. So you just said very good points why you're strongly against LaVine. And I agree just because, like everyone has said, we're not worried about the offense really. Like, it would be nice, yeah, to have Zach LaVine's skill set and
Yeah.
have another creator.
And like, I'm not obtuse. I know that even though we're fifth in offense right now, there are specific concerns still with the half court
Yeah.
offense for a playoff setting. But
Hmm.
like, are you going to make it there if you can't get stops even in the
Yeah.
regular season?
Yeah. And like, we are obviously, I think we and many are very concerned about the defense first and foremost. So, we had KCP, like, so it's like that's the guy we need. Anyway, but so we want more 3-and-D players and screen navigators and such to put with Jokic, not necessarily a Zach LaVine. So yeah, the more I think about it and just like over last night and the sporting, I definitely am not excited about a Zach LaVine trade. If they do it, I'll obviously hope it works. But I would rather us do a deal with, if we were going to, like the Nets or the Hawks,
Mm.
and some kind of construction trade around that with like Cam Johnson and who else would be in the Nets Cam Johnson trade?
I've seen some Dorian Finney-Smith trade machine images circulating. I thought it was more interesting when like potentially Schroeder could have been in that package, but obviously he's
Not
gone now.
anymore.
Just to get another like, oh yeah, he's a great screen navigator and he can obviously give you some on-ball juice on top of that, but obviously not in the cards. But I think Dorian Finney-Smith would help with some of our issues. Like part of the problem with if you trade MPJ, you have two playable power forwards on your roster, and MPJ is the starting small forward, but he plays backup four now because like we just don't have another playable four, and Peyton's a little small, and even when he's on the floor, like you need some more, size on there to help out with the rebounding, which is why DeAndre Jordan has become the new, pretty much solidified backup center. You need another power forward because you can't just have AG. Even if he's playing backup five, like you just need another big body on the roster. And so Dorian Finney-Smith would make a lot of sense there. This is part of the reason that teams don't tend to like to do a 1-to-1 trades for like a particular position. Usually two different positions, right? Because you need to like keep some kind of roster balance intact. And to be fair, our roster is already heavily skewed towards power forwards. It's just that a bunch of them are unplayable.
So, you have like Cam Johnson from the Nets, which would be interesting. I've heard mixed feelings on that. I think a lot of people would be happier and easy, it would be easier to accept a Cam Johnson move over a Zach LaVine, obviously, and a Dorian Finney-Smith.
Right. And it would also make more sense to me, in terms of maintaining your flexibility and even improving your flexibility, you'd break MPJ's contract up into multiple contracts by getting more players back instead of consolidating him with another player to get another star. But right, there's some competing interests there, because you talked about the need in some instances to open up another roster spot. Obviously, like even if you wanted to do the Cam Johnson Dorian Finney-Smith deal, you'd have to waive somebody, unless you wanted to trade 3 guys to the Nets for 2 players, because we just don't have any roster spots. And so there's also that complication too. It's like, are you more concerned with trying to get more good players back and then having to eat like a little bit of dead money from having to waive like a Jalen Pickett or, even waiving Vlatko? Or are you more concerned with trying to make sure that you create a new roster spot by consolidating players in a trade, which ends up getting you, a more expensive player? And that to me, like I said before, I just think from the pure calculated roster building standpoint, I think that making this kind of move in a way that leaves you less flexible in the future than we are right now, which is like trying to figure out how to make something work, would be a really big mistake. Going forward when it comes to like trying to build a championship team around Jokic.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it comes down to, is how aggressive does the front office want to be to reshape the roster, just to like we've always been talking about, maximizing Jokic and making sure we're competing, because I think it's very legitimate to think that just holding steady with this roster is not going to cut it if you want to win a championship this season.
I think that's totally fair because of how they'd struggled.
And maybe the front office is fine with that. And they're like, okay, another gap year, kind of like we talked about or whatever. And you're still going to have to trade MPJ this summer if you want to like do something though. So I don't know what is going to happen in the summer where we could then fix the team. There's like some trade ideas from the Hawks. Like, it could be Hunter, could be with Bogey and Nance. I don't know why the Hawks would say yes to that. I think that's like way too much.
I mean, if they're trying to pivot to a rebuild,
but like let's say like Shroeder could be included in that, so it's like Shroeder.
Well,
MPJ.
that would be why they do it. Is like, right. We don't even play. Like Nance was a DNP in their last NBA Cup game. We don't even play this guy. Maybe we could try to get like a young player out of it. Also, I mean, this was reported literally right before we recorded that Kobe Buffkin, their young backup point guard, has suffered a shoulder injury and he's going to be out, I think, indefinitely. I don't know that he's out for the season, but he's going to miss some significant time. So they're probably like, okay, maybe the party's over. We need to. And it's not like they can pivot to rebuild because the Spurs own their picks, but they also are like, what are we doing right now? The Hawks are kind of a mess. I don't understand that team.
I haven't like seriously thought about what players I want to get back for MPJ that's the perfect fit to really push us over the edge and get a title this season.
There's no trade that would come to save them, right?
Yeah.
There are certain things about how the team has been playing that only they could improve internally. Like when it comes to the things I think they need, it's almost all stuff that's like coming from the bench, right? It's trying to, find some secondary shot creation. I don't think you have to go out and spend $40 million on Zach LaVine to get it. Like we won a championship in dominant fashion where our secondary on-ball creator was Bruce Brown off the bench. Just because of how much Jokic makes other players better. Actually, that brings me to another point that I had. Like Zach LaVine is a really good player, obviously, right? Like he got the contract that he got for a reason at the time, whether just like Jamal's a really good player, even though he, has, had his struggles, and like LaVine's had his struggles and he also has had his injury issues. And that's another problem. Like if you trade MPJ, you're trading the player who's like played the most games for us over the last 2 years. And so that becomes its own separate issue. But a lot of people talk about how like if you get like basically an all-star caliber player next to Jokic, is he going to put up like even better numbers? And I think that Jokic does make other players better. Like, don't get me wrong about that. But I'd also like people to consider the possibility that his numbers are the same or even go down slightly, not because he's like worse around Jokic, but because Jokic ball is a more egalitarian basketball than most teams play. And just by virtue of like shot distribution, he might not, just get as many opportunities. And so he might have like the same splits that he has in Chicago. Like I think that there's a possibility that there's a point of like diminishing returns with Jokic. And I don't think it's the reason that Jokic has never played with an all-star, but I'm kind of curious about what happens when you bring that caliber of player here. Whether they actually like reach this, like, oh, we're going to turn them like they're going to look like a 1A next to Jokic. Like, I don't think that's the case necessarily.
I would be very curious to see, but it's difficult to get us in a situation where we could see that. So,
but I think that he raises up high IQ players who have some kind of skill that they can do. Particularly on ball. Like if you can do something on ball and you're high IQ, even if you have other limitations, like Jokic is going to make you look amazing.
You would think like, it would be
Christian.
So easy.
Christian's about to get super paid because he can like run in transition and cut and finish at the rim. And that's like kind of all he can do right now. The shooting he's kind of gone through a bit of a shooting slump over the last 10 games or so. And he's still going to get like massively paid.
MPJ, Zeke, Shroeder, for Kelly Olynyk and Bruce Brown.
Not giving up Julian and MPJ. Like you get one.
Just the money is the only way to do it. But,
Put Pickett in there.
Yeah, but the Raptors, why would they do that trade?
Messiah, do us another solid. Like I don't know. I mean, I didn't even know that Kelly Olynyk was playing for this year until recently because he wasn't playing in for the first month.
Is he hurt or something? I don't know what's going on.
Maybe he was hurt because I was like, where's their backup center? Like, what's going on
That
here?
is funny, Masai. And like, even the Bulls GM Arturis has connections with the Nuggets. So Swipa was suggesting, Booth maybe be able to Dosunmu, being like, Arturis, we need Jokic to win championships. Do us a solid. Send us this dude. Like, come on. So that would be pretty amusing. But I agree, saddling ourselves to a big contract like Zach LaVine when we're already like strapped to do anything with these huge contracts.
We won't be able. That's problem. The thing is, like, if you're going to do that consolidation move, it should be your home run move.
Yeah.
And I don't think this is the home run move. And the reason I think it should be your home run move is because you're not going to be able to do much after that. Like, you're going to be more strapped than you are right now.
If you are someone listening and you don't want to trade MPJ, completely fair. If you're someone who says, hey, let's go all in and try and do whatever we can and win it this year and make a big trade and let's go for it. I could also see some of that. It's just a matter of seeing what we decide and who we bring back and if it works out. So we'll be monitoring that as time goes on. But
I just had this last tweet I wanted to read out because this obviously came in the middle of the NBA Cup, the NBA Cup finals, and I think that the reporting, like the sourcing and all this, the legwork was probably done around the time the Nuggets were like really struggling. They were going 500, like losing every other game, losing games to the Wizards, etc. Right. Similar to how the Ramona Shelburne article was clearly all written as they struggled through their preseason and their first two losses, and then they had the overtime wins that were like, what's going on with this team right now? And then it came out after they started winning a couple of games because that's just like when the story comes out, right? But at Hombris tweeted out, I guess I wanted to feel positive. He was trying to, I guess they were trying to sort of rationalize a LaVine deal, and I was shutting every argument down. I guess I just wanted to feel positive because the last 3 games the vibes are good, but Booth is so terrible that he screws that up too. And that was kind of how I felt.
I don't think Booth called Tony Jones and said release.
No, I don't think so either.
But
I don't think so either. But he hasn't been quiet in his movements, let's say.
Nah, he never is.
So if Mike Singer, love Mike Singer, he wrote the Why So Serious Jokic biography, which I forgot to stop by the bookstore to pick up today, but I plan on doing that. Very much looking forward to reading that. But if he was brought in, but if he was brought in to be the director of intelligence to sort of plug a leaky ship, it's not working.
Yeah. Well, also, I mean, I do remember Mike sharing a snippet from his book before it came out, and it was about Jokic talking with Calvin Booth and him being like intent on trying to be, a Duncan level player where he's winning multiple championships, and what does he need to do to get to that? And obviously it's a partnership. One player can't just do it all. So you need a great team that's reliable and a great coach, and you need a, star player like Jokic. Obviously, I think he is to Duncan's caliber, but it's the other things that are now questions. So it's like, I'm wondering with that in Booth's mind, where I'm sure he wants to do that too. Like he's not trying to make the Nuggets lose. It makes me wonder about the likelihood that he is going to try to make a trade, because I wouldn't be surprised if he is taking this very seriously, that he wants to win as many championships with Jokic as possible. It's just not the greatest record right now. So.
I mean, he did win one. Like, we don't have to like super exaggerate. Like, this guy's a total bum and all that. He did get us KCP, even though he let KCP walk later. And he brought in Bruce for the 1 year that he was able to. Like, that has nothing to do with the front office. We were just legally not able to retain Bruce Brown. And, drafted Christian, drafted Peyton, who, to this point hasn't been able to be a facet in a playoff rotation yet, like full time. And that's another concern for this season. But he drafted Julian, drafted Duran, and those have been good moves, regardless of all of the other moves, that they've done that have been bad. Extended Aaron, extended Jamal, which I think were the right thing to do. It's just it's been rough. It's been rough. I think that the interesting part about all this is, again, the thing that they seem to be focused on with a lot of these moves when it comes to, they're talking about wing scoring. They talk about needing it for the regular season and the postseason. I get the postseason concerns, but regular season, again, we're top 5 offense, and the issue has been the defense, and they want to get smaller and make the defense worse. So I just need them to lock in here and like focus on the clear areas of concern that we already have instead of exacerbating them. But what do I know? It's a tough job. It's a lot for MPJ, man.
Yeah.
And we're about to get into that with our last news story. MPJ's brother was, I don't know if we talked about this on the show, because I think the news was happening maybe right before the playoffs last year, about how Jontay had been caught as part of this like bumbling like gambling ring where like a bunch of people were like betting on two-way players and like betting like $80,000 at a time on things that two-way players are doing, obviously get caught. Text messages, everything. And Jontay was charged and convicted of wire fraud connected to this gambling where he was like, helping people like bet his unders on props and like sitting out of games, like that kind of thing. And he was actually scheduled to be sentenced today. Like as we sit here recording, like the news came out, it was either yesterday or the day before, about his sentencing being today. And when I checked the update before the show, it turns out that the sentencing was delayed until next year. As Will's reaction to that was like, yeah, that's because court stuff always gets delayed, which is very true. So that's going to be happening, I guess, next year. It's interesting. I wonder if he's in custody awaiting sentencing or not. Like, I wonder if he's like able to spend the holidays with his family, like all that. Anyway, like the reason I bring this up, and especially next to the MPJ story, is not just because it's it's related to the NBA and all of that with that sport, but MPJ and his family have he's gone through a lot with his family over the last few years. I think all the guys on the teams, like the main guys on the team, really have. And this story with Jontay being suspended from the NBA, like it's a life ban, and then also having legal charges brought in. He's being charged in Canada is the other thing, because he was a Toronto Raptor when all of this was happening. So that's got to be a weird situation. Yeah. It's just like really incredibly stressful when they're like his brothers in particular, gotten involved in a lot of messed up stuff.
Yeah, it's really sad. And, I just hope the best for him and that he can get through whatever this trade season will bring for him and he'll be okay, which is kind of why I'm hoping if we do make a trade. I mean, I hope the Nuggets get what's best for them. But if he could go to like the Hawks and play with Trey, I think he would be at least happy about that because they're buddies. And that maybe Bogey would come back and play with Jokic and you'd get like some friends reuniting and such. But the NBA.
Okay, but let's talk about like some basketball fits. Like, let's bring some guys back that can like play some point of attack defense and like do something helpful for us.
Well, obviously we'd get other guys in the Hawks trade. But let's cover some other trades that happened around the league and just get through those. So the first one obviously is that Dennis Shroeder was traded to the Warriors. That included Melton, who is out for the season.
With that ACL, really unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. And 3 second-round pick for Dennis and a
1 second-round pick. So
1 second-round pick.
Golden State gave up 3 second-round picks, and they get Dennis and one back. So the net is 2 second-round picks. And you might wonder, like, why would you not just give the 2 second-round picks? I think Golden State wanted to try to get a second rounder in this draft because it's a pretty good draft class, and the Brooklyn was willing to give it to them for more of the other second round picks that Golden State has. So they have some like things in the future, but that's not relevant really to this deal. It's mostly about Dennis Schroeder going to the Warriors. I wanted him for the Nuggets.
Yeah, I know. That was funny.
What was your reaction to seeing this trade news? Because it actually came out a day before it was like allowed to happen. Like the news of it came out. Obviously, these things are worked out usually in advance. But a bunch of players that signed in free agency this past summer became trade eligible on December 15th. And so now they're eligible to be traded all the way through the trade deadline. So what was your reaction when you saw that Dennis was going to the Warriors?
First of all, not surprised that Dennis was moved just because the Nets needed to do that because they were supposed to be tanking, but he was too good for them. He was winning games, and that's why we were joking that we wanted him on the Nuggets. So not surprised him going to
Yes,
the.
joking. That's what I was doing. Definitely joking.
No, not joking, but just having a good time thinking about the possibility. I hate the Warriors, so my first instinct goes, how much does this move the needle for them? I think Dennis is a good player. It's going to help them out. But then I looked at what they traded, and then I was like, dang, like you cannot criticize this trade at all. Like there's no downside for the Warriors. They got him for basically nothing, I would argue. It's 3 second-round picks reminds us of Reggie Jackson being dumped for 3 second-round picks, and then you immediately think, wow, they got a really good player back for that amount, including sending a very injured D'Anthony Melton. We didn't get anything back for that. Obviously, it's different circumstances, different teams, all that jazz, different salary caps and whatnot. But I just thought it's all like gravy for the Warriors. That's pretty much nothing. And I like Dennis, and he's going to help them.
Yeah, I think he's going to help them in terms of like how much it moves the needle. I don't know how much he helps them in the playoffs. Like he gives them another point of attack guy, but the main thing that he helps them with right now is just having some kind of reliable ball handling off the bench. Because they just don't have that when Steph and Draymond are off the floor. I'm not going to lie, I don't know why Kerr plays so many lineups with Steph and Draymond both off the floor. I've watched a bunch of the Warriors this year, and I keep seeing that. And yes, all the Golden State fans are crashing out about it, but he does have those lineups out there. Brandon Podziemski hasn't taken the step that they, were probably expecting of him this season. That compounded with the D'Anthony Melton injury obviously put more strain on their ball handling and particularly on ball creation. So Dennis gives them just a little bit more juice in the backcourt because of that. The other important thing to note about this deal from a logistical standpoint is that if you do a trade with, somebody that was signed over the summer as a free agent, if that trade happens by December 16th, so there's basically a 1-day window between when they become trade eligible and this other deadline, that player will be allowed to be aggregated in a future trade. After December 16th, if somebody is traded to a new team, they can't be aggregated in a future trade. So you couldn't combine them with another contract. So the Warriors may not have Dennis after the trade deadline, potentially. So they maintained it's kind of like a kind of a random loophole. I don't actually know the specific reason for that very, very specific kind of loophole in the CBA when it comes to aggregating contracts. But that was just an interesting detail that I saw some people noting, and it sort of indicated to me that the Warriors are leaving the door open for a bigger move to happen between now and the deadline, because I think what they need most of all is a secondary creator next to Steph. I mean, to be completely honest, I think that they need somebody who's better than Steph to be their primary.
What do you mean better?
Because I don't think that Steph is like a 1A anymore. Like I think he's really good, and he can be a great 1B, especially like an awesome 2A.
Holy shit.
But I mean, if you've watched the Warriors this year, like
I haven't. No,
he just can't. I think a 1A has to be able to carry, and he just can't. He can't carry that burden anymore, especially like on ball. Like he's just so much better off the ball. Like the decision making, it's always been kind of shaky, even though he's great and he's a great playmaker too. But in terms of like being like a consistent shot creator on the ball, it's not really there. Go ahead.
Do you think Kevin Durant is a good 1A still?
I think if Kevin Durant is your best player, you're in trouble.
Right.
But I also had I had that feeling when people thought that Kevin Durant was the best player on the Warriors.
Yeah. Well, so, the Suns brought in Tyus Jones to be like a steady on-ball guy, right, for those dudes. Is Shroeder going to be that role for the Warriors? Like, if you don't like Steph on ball as much, the Shroeder minutes with Steph, even, he can be on ball, and Steph's always good off ball.
I think that's exactly how they're going to end up playing him. There were some quotes coming out from Kerr and from Draymond about how the team was going to adjust to Dennis and how he plays, because he brings things that the Warriors need that they're not good at. But I also think that it's probably not going to be as like shaky of a fit for Dennis to fit into Golden State's system either. Plus he'll bring the just kind of like can consistently like run pick and roll and just kind of slow things down sometimes and just create a good shot in the half court, because sometimes the Warriors, like, sometimes it gets too frenetic. And also when things aren't frenetic enough, they don't have the juice to be able to create shots unless there's chaos. So I think having somebody a little bit more steady in that position will be helpful.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. Mostly because I agree about, the Warriors needing some other type of trade, and I think we've always known that. So the fact that they didn't really, I mean, that's a lot of picks. I don't know, like what.
I mean, it's seconds, like it's
Yeah,
second round picks, and it's for a solidly good player. It's not
right.
like what we did where we dumped all the seconds
And then
for
you have
a
nothing
salary
else.
dump of an expiring contract.
So yeah, they just have more still to get something else done. So that's impressive for them. And
Yeah.
yeah, they obviously need
They
that.
own all
So
of their first round picks. Like, people forget about this with Golden State, but they have a cache of their own picks that are available, like, now and through the future if they wanted to make a big move. They just haven't pulled the trigger in the last few years, or really ever. Like, it's why they own all their picks. That's
yeah,
is because they haven't done anything yet. We'll see if they do. I think it's really interesting. There have been rumors, obviously, about Jimmy Butler to everywhere. Jimmy Butler to everywhere.
but definitely the
Has definitely
Warriors.
been swirling. The Warriors could be an interesting fit for him as well. But obviously, when the reason that deal doesn't just get done is because there's, like, serious questions about it. Like, Jimmy's not always available. Jimmy's not always, like, fully engaged. This, that, and the other. You're going to have to pay Jimmy if you're going to give up, that sort of level of assets for him. And we don't know if the Warriors really want to do that. So with all of these trades, there's going to be, these sort of, they might seem nitpicky, like, friction points, because, like, obviously, like, before the new CBA, maybe this deal just gets done because you just want to get that other star player on your team. But there are other considerations for your roster, not just now, because obviously you have to give up a bunch of your depth just to kind of create the salary matching for this new player. And maybe that's part of, like, okay, yeah, we gave up Melton, who could have been a salary match anyway, because his contract was also expiring and he was only on a 1-year deal. Dennis is also about to become an unrestricted free agency, so they don't limit their flexibility in that sense. And so if a team wanted to take on more expiring contracts in exchange for a star, the Warriors can offer that in Dennis, and obviously some of the other things they'd aggregate wouldn't be expiring. But yeah, it's just interesting to me because it feels like the Warriors have been able to maintain, like, the maximum flexibility ever since they let Klay Thompson walk. And it's been interesting to watch that team operate, because they're basically the team that inspired the most recent CBA, right?
Yes, unfortunately.
And now they're operating
Oh.
in this, like, post dynasty, post new CBA environment and trying to maneuver.
Wait, I saw a really weird rumor and I totally don't remember what it was, but there was like some ridiculous story that I can't remember who was talking about it, whether it was Matt who addressed it, but it was someone was saying there was some other move that was about to happen that didn't happen, and that is the one that pushed the owners over the edge to the CBA, and it was something really ridiculous.
So it was Brian Windhorst was telling a story about
Yes.
how the Clippers getting Norman Powell
Yeah.
is what
What the
inspired
hell?
the new CBA. But it was probably a combination, because 2 years ago, the Clippers and the Warriors were the two most expensive teams in the NBA, and it felt like
Yeah.
other owners were feeling like, we can't compete with these teams whose ownerships are willing to just spend, like, exorbitantly. We have to make it more expensive and more taxing for them to, spend this much more over the salary cap, or over, at that point, we only had a first apron, not a second apron. Now we have both. That's even more onerous restrictions, right? I actually have a side theory that I don't know that I've actually discussed on the show before. So the NBA is talking about expansion, right? In a bunch of other sports leagues around the US, around the world, you have money coming in from all kinds of sources, particularly internationally. And it's no secret that the Saudis and the Emiratis are heavily involved in various sports franchises around the world in different sports, soccer in particular, golf, obviously. Like, they created their whole own league with the Live Golf League, right? And in an effort to sports washing, basically, right? It's reputational laundering. And one of the more, I think, reasonable impetuses for the current ownership groups around the NBA to want to start basically implementing these more onerous restrictions on spending now is that they expect, in the form of, various LLCs and whatever, in particular Emirati money, because we have so much connection with United Arab Emirates through the NBA Dubai programs and all that. Like, we have teams like going to, like, there's a lot of, then we have the Emirates NBA Cup now. Like, there's a lot of that money that's going to be flowing into the league, and they probably don't want it to be that easy, like super easy to just spend a bunch of money for ownership groups for whom money is literally no object, right? And we've already seen with the Clippers, it's working because Steve Ballmer, one of the richest men on the planet, wasn't willing to retain Paul George at the full max and whatever. Like, that whole like saga was murky, but it tells you that the restrictions that they've imparted are working, at least to the intended effect, at least, in that way, even if they're also impacting, other things downstream, as we've talked about a lot with how the new restrictions impact even smaller market teams like the Nuggets, etc.
Yeah, it's funny because at the time of them letting Paul George go, we were kind of critical of them in the fact that they weren't willing to pay for that when historically they would have been. So we were kind of using that to say, hey, they're afraid of the CBA too. Now, Paul George and the Sixers are a disaster, so some people were theorizing well, maybe they knew something that we didn't
maybe
know.
They knew. Maybe they knew. But I also think that they didn't want to lock themselves into long-term money on an older player. Because, like, in the past, that would have been basically a no-brainer thing to do. Like, yeah, we're going to keep our team good and try to keep it getting better. And, like, even if this guy ages out, like, yeah, it'll be dead money on our books, but it's not that onerous. Now it's very onerous, not just in terms of the luxury tax implications, but also on how you actually build your roster going forward. So if you care about the quality of the team, then you have to have these considerations as well.
Yeah, we had the days of AD asking out of the Pelicans. You had Kevin Durant asking out of the Nets, and Kyrie
we had
and James
Zach LaVine
Harden
asking out of the Bulls last year, if you'll recall. But
so
I mean, neither was Dame, right? Like, that was maybe the first bellwether of this, that first summer before the CBA came into effect. But obviously, Portland would have been impacted because it was like, Dame, I think, requested the trade a couple of weeks before the CBA came out, and Portland didn't just send him where he wanted to go, and that was maybe our first indication that, like, oh, okay, these restrictions are legit and teams have to be a little bit more careful with the moves that they make.
Yeah. I almost feel conflicted on it because I used to, like, trades are exciting and it's fun. I think it annoys some people because they hate when players switch and they want that consistency. And I think there's an idea that for fans and teams, it's better to have players be, like, consistently on your team, especially superstars, and to have stars asking out and having too much power. That was anxiety around the league. But it was still fun on some degree, as scary as it was for fans. And I was scared when Kevin Durant got traded to the Suns when we were in our title year. It ended up not mattering. But,
hey, they took us to 6.
Yeah, they took us to 6, and we were tied at one point. That was the most nervous I was the whole playoffs where we won that title. But now we're in this point where, teams are super careful. Money's super tight. There's so many rules. You got to match salaries. You can't aggregate certain salaries. Like, it's getting crazy. And so that all is the context of these trades that we're going to talk about. And let's talk about Thomas Bryant really quickly before MPJ, because he was traded from the Heat to the Pacers for 31 second-round pick swap rights.
Yeah, that was actually the first thing that happened. That happened before the Shroeder news. Thomas Bryant is he's on his way to Indiana, and that happened. That was I think I literally quote tweeted it with, like, what? I guess it is news because it did happen, but I don't even know that he's going to play in Indiana. I think that's interesting. I know they've suffered a bit with their big man depth this year because they lost Jalen Smith. Well, they let him walk in free agency, and now he's with the Bulls. And then they Isaiah Jackson was out for part of the season with an injury, but I think he's back now. And obviously they have Miles Turner, so maybe they just want to have that that third string big on the rosters like ready to go, because I mean the Pacers have had lots of problems this year. I don't know that their like third string center is like anywhere near the top of issues they've been having, but they felt the need to just get another body on the bench at that position, and they traded some 2031 second round pick swap rights with the Miami Heat. I don't even know if in 2031 those teams will be substantially apart from each other in the standings. So it was basically just a deal for the Heat didn't take on any money, so I guess the Pacers just had an open roster spot and needed to fill it with a position of need. So that's what happened.
I guess there's a chance Thomas Bryant could do something with them. I liked him on the Lakers. Obviously, he came to the Nuggets and, put a jersey on and sat on the bench. So I just sort of reminded of that.
He cheered a lot.
Yeah.
Cheered a lot during the title run. He's an NBA champion. Put some respect on his name.
He's the one who told the story about Jokic in the finals saying,
yep.
Play the right way. I don't fucking care about scoring.
I think he said it was during the Sun series.
Was it during that? So yeah. I love Thomas Bryant for that reason alone, because that was a great story and Jokic tidbit. So shout out to him for that.
All right, well, let's talk about the NBA Cup. Did you watch the Mavs Thunder game in the semifinals, the West semis?
No. I am over the NBA Cup, let me tell you, but whatever.
I mean, it's just like, did you watch the Mavs Thunder game from that day or whatever?
Yeah.
So my takeaway from that game, so PJ Washington didn't play, is that he's really important for the Mavs in that matchup, because they just don't look at all like a team that they should be constructed to be even without PJ Washington, versus the Thunder that is like big, physical, bullies. Because like OKC out-rebounded them in that game. Either Daniel Gafford or Derek Lively was on the floor at all points during that game. And Kenrich Williams, coming off the bench for OKC, was still a plus 17. And the Thunder killed them on the glass. They killed them with the turnovers, of course, because that's what OKC does. But it was like, that's all they did. And they just soundly destroyed Dallas. And Lou Dort locked up Luka in a way I didn't really expect, because we talked about this during the playoffs, how I thought OKC was doing a really good job keeping Luka bottled up in the first half of that series. But then he started to figure some things out, and then he just looked like, best player on the floor for the last two games, because he was getting to his comfortable shots, super efficient, hitting his three, and then in this game, Lou Dort just completely shut him down.
Yeah, that's crazy to hear about. I mean, Luka had such a size advantage versus them in the playoffs, and was using his body.
Dort was the only person who could be on him, and by the end of the series, it was not even that. Yeah. Dort was still annoying, but Luka was pretty easily getting him into foul trouble, and also still able to get to his spot even with Dort on him. And then everyone else, he was just straight up bullying. So I was really surprised to see his overall performance in this game. Really poor shooting game, really tough decision making with all of the turnovers that OKC was able to force and all of that. But it was oh, well, this is the formula. OKC could walk away from that game feeling pretty good about themselves, before the actual NBA Cup final. But let's talk about the game that you actually watched.
Yeah.
Of these two. The Bucks Thunder NBA Cup final. So the Bucks ended up in the finals after defeating the Atlanta Hawks in the Eastern semis in a pretty that was a pretty grimy game. I assume you didn't watch that, but I did. It was pretty.
But the Hawks beat the Knicks. That was surprising me.
Yeah, they did a good job defending the Knicks overall, but the Knicks were also missing a ton of shots. Mikal Bridges is a problem for that team right now. But yeah, so the Bucks make it to the final, and we've got this pretty heavyweight matchup between Giannis and the Bucks, who have been I still don't we talked before the game, and I said the Bucks, they've been on a winning streak, but I don't think that they're actually that good. In part because I think their offense is not as good as it needs to be for what the defense is going to be, just by virtue of your Dame, Gary Trent Jr. backcourt. And in this game, they just took everything that I said about them and told me to shove it, because they had this just dominant defensive game against OKC.
Why do you think that they struggled so much with? I mean, I know Giannis is a top 3 player in the league, if not. Some people are debating the best in the league, whatever. But he's a defensive menace. He's athletic. He can protect the rim. They got Brook Lopez. I know, like, with the Mavs Thunder, that's still like a weakness of the Thunder. Their ability to attack like post defenders on offense specifically. And they very much struggled with it with the Bucks.
Their ability to attack post defenders? What do you mean by that?
They can't attack a Giannis and a Brook Lopez in the paint as easily. Like, those shots are going to be heavily contested, and they were terrible.
Right? Like, they don't even have to be that close to you, but they're 7 feet tall.
And their numbers in the paint on offense was awful. Like, it was 7 for 30 something, or was 7 for 20 something.
Jeez, that's what it really looks bad. Like, to be honest. I think that the Thunder had like an 83 offensive rating in this game.
We wondered about that just because they're more spread offense. You know, with Chet, he wasn't playing in this game, so you got Isiah Heartenstein, who I thought was the biggest like takeaway from the game on offense and defense in terms of just like, I have questions about how he's going to fit on both sides and how they're going to utilize him, which I think they can do better at, and they just didn't do it very well in this game.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that you saw some of the limitations of, like, there were a lot of, like, there's a lot of good that Hartenstein brings, and I don't think that he limits their offense. I just think he doesn't fix the problems that they have, if that makes sense. One of the things that he allows, if they, you know, choose to use him this way, is he can be this hub and allow a lot of OKC, like Shea and everyone else, to operate off ball. He can hit cutters. Like, he was making some really like smart passes in this game. The Bucks would like rotate, like especially Giannis was like rotating back in the paint so fast that it didn't matter. And is like, okay, that layup it's now heavily contested, and you need to like reset your entire possession now. So some of that stuff was just kind of rendered moot. And then it's like, okay, well, Hartenstein has to score now, just because of how the Bucks were playing him. They'd drop way back and then come up and contest his floater. And I noticed this during the Knicks series against the Sixers. If Hartenstein's floater is even semi-contested, like he rushes that shot so much that it looks totally, well, it already kind of looks like a wild shot, but when it's wide open, he makes it. When it's not open and he rushes it, like it misses badly, right? Even when he's close. And so I think that he was kind of like spooked by like the timing of those contests. So that was some of it. But I mean, the biggest issue in this game is that Shea is their only reliable creator, and the Bucks were able to shut him down. And when they were able to do that, J-Dub was not able to like really take advantage of. One of the things that really impressed me in this game was just like Dame and Gary Trent Jr. and AJ Green were able to shut down all of OKC's perimeter guys. Like, none of them were comfortable on ball, especially on ball. Off ball, you know, less so, but they don't, like, a lot of what they do is on ball. Like, OKC is one of the highest isolation rates in the league. I think they're only 17th in assist ratio. So it's not that they don't move the ball a lot, like they do, but they rely so much on that one-on-one shot creation by Shea and by J-Dub to a lesser degree. And when that's not happening and Shea isn't like drawing 3 guys on him because he can't miss, it's harder to move the ball around. I think they ended this game with only like 8 assists or something. Like, it was a really rough overall offensive game for the Thunder, and all stemmed from the fact that so much of what they rely on is this one-on-one creation.
That taps into the idea that the Thunder are still young, still
the Thunder had 13 assists in this game. 13 assists to 10 turnovers.
But I think that plays into what you're saying, where they're not passing the ball, and the shots that they're deciding to take, settling, if you want to use that word, and not kicking out or, you know, trying to get or working harder or making an extra pass to get the better look is just something they're going to have to work on. Yeah, they were just settling shots in the paint that were contested, and that's not a good time to do that against the Bucks, because they got dudes who can contest it. They have size. They're way bigger than the Thunder. They need to work on like getting it out to the perimeter and getting guys more shots, even if they're missing, which they were. Just not enough opportunities for them to really start hitting those open looks and to like spread the Bucks a little bit more. Because Shea is not a good shooting night for Shea, but they're loading up on him. Just like the Thunder were loading up on Giannis, but Giannis was just passing it to dudes, and they were hitting them off the help.
The difference is that you'd have like 3 or 4 guys on Giannis in the paint. Shea was maybe drawing 2. Sometimes like he doesn't have quite the passing vision, and you wouldn't necessarily expect it because he is shorter than Giannis. There's like the literal passing vision. But that is something that he needs to grow in, right? Like Shea is not nearly the playmaker that even Giannis is, but some of the the guys that he's in the running with the MVP race against Jokic, against Luka are. He's not. Part of that is that, and Giannis has sort of developed it a lot more recently. It's a lot different when you're creating with the intention of getting a shot for somebody else versus creating for yourself. One of the things that I was really curious if we'd see by this point in the season, honestly, with Isiah Heartenstein, back from his early season injury, is whether we just see more of SGA running pick and roll with him. Because we saw at the end of the Mavs series that OKC's offense was really unlocked when they ran pick and roll with Chet or ran with Chet in the dunker spot as opposed to operating more on the perimeter, because he actually is a vertical spacing threat, unlike the other guys that they like to put in the dunker spot, which means it's a little bit harder for whoever the help defender or the often the big is on that guy to step up to help contest Shea's shot in the mid-range. They're just not really running a lot of that. That's kind of the counter to what I talked about earlier, or another thing that they could do with iHeart, as opposed to running him kind of operating as a hub on the perimeter more. They could have him more directly involved in the action inside. But I think they're so kind of married to their current spacing principles that running that at a heavy dose doesn't really make a lot of sense for them. Shea also rejects a ton of screens as opposed to using the screens in pick and roll. And so the big often just ends up on the perimeter because that's what you should do, that you should stay out there when Shea's rejecting the screen to create the most space for him. But I thought that Andre Jackson Jr., who was the primary defender on him in this game, just did a really good job chasing him under and around screens and just like able to stay attached without falling behind SGA. And like the reason that he was able to do that is because SGA wasn't hitting his threes, and he's been hitting his threes as kind of like a league average clip this season. He's been taking more pull-up threes, so that's kind of impressive, but he wasn't hitting his threes at all in this game, and so Ajax was able to go under every single screen. He also doesn't have the quickest release, and he's often kind of trying to use a three as a threat to drive. But when you don't bite on it, you have time to recover without kind of giving up the drive, because he's not always like ready to shoot it like kind of right away. Yeah. Sort of similar to Jamal, even though I think SGA is like better about taking his threes and whatever. But a similar issue that like we've had with Jamal in that sense is like you're kind of pump faking the three instead of like actually trying to go for it. And so the defender is able to recover and kind of read you in that way.
I also wonder about the pick and roll with SGA and Hartenstein, because he's not a popping big like Chet is, and he was hurt at the beginning of the season. The SGA is not used to playing with him, not a lot of reps.
Well, yeah, because it's not really like it's not really like a staple of their offense over the last few years, because they didn't have Chet one year, and then last year they just had Chet like popping a lot. And then at the end of the Mavs series, they started to run some pick and roll, started to run with some Chet in the dunker spot. But Shea doesn't really like operate with like a traditional big in that way.
But I think like some people are going to question, this is the same question as last year. They were good, but we were, solving problems in the playoffs and winning series after series is a grueling thing that teams need experience. And Mark needs to learn, the coach, Mark Dagnall, needs to learn how to utilize Isiah Heartenstein better on offense and defense, because he wasn't even guarding Giannis in the post sometimes. He was getting out onto the perimeter guarding guys, which was crazy in that context. And then they're settling for so much shit in the paint against a paint like kind of dominant defense when you have Damian Lillard on the perimeter that you could try to like matchup hunter. And
Well, I mean, the
stuff like
reason
that.
that Dame is such an issue on the perimeter defensively is because you can blow by him and get into the paint. It's not like he
Yeah.
can't contest on the perimeter,
Right.
right? So I don't think that that's necessarily
Yeah, it goes hand in
the issue.
hand.
I heard like Jason Timpf had a similar take, and he said that they had the same issue in the Mav series. I think I completely disagree, to be honest. The reason that I said that they didn't address their main issue offensively this season and created a new one by getting rid of Giddey, which I'm not saying is the wrong move, but they left another vacuum there in terms of on-ball creation that could spell Shea and create some easier shots for him. It's not that Giddey it's not that the offense was necessarily better with Giddey on the floor, but getting Shea going with easier shots so that he doesn't only have to create all this tough off the dribble stuff, definitely an issue. J-Dub is just not there at this point. It might end up being the case by the end of the season, but he's not there at this point as a secondary shot creator in terms of being like a championship level second option. And we saw that in this game. Bucks were doing a really good job throughout the night, forcing him to his right hand, which he did work on this summer, but it is still his weaker side. And he settled a lot he really likes to get to that mid-range is the other thing. So he might be hitting those shots, and he hits a lot of them, especially in fourth quarters, even though he wasn't hitting them in the fourth quarter in this game. This is my thing with OKC's offense is you look at their shot diet, both last year and this year, it's not really conducive to even a top 10 offense, even though they're top 10 in both last year and they've recently moved up into the top 10 this year. But it's not conducive to a top 10 offense. It's just that they're incredibly efficient on the shots that they're making. So Shea is like hitting all his middies, J-Dub's hitting all his middies, and they hit a lot of their threes. And they make their rim shots too, but they don't generate a lot of shots at the rim. They also don't generate a lot of threes. They actually take a lot more mid-range shots than you'd think. They're taking more threes this year, though, to be fair. I think that their problem that was revealed in the Mavs series is that they need somebody on that team who's able to hit those tough contested shots in the paint. I said they need an athletic slasher. I thought J-Dub would kind of transform into this guy because he does this sometimes, but he loves the mid-range so much and he doesn't I think he can hit those shots when he does get to the rim, but he's not really looking. He's looking to generate the jump shot more. I don't even think that's necessarily bad. This kid is a third-year player now, right? Like I'm not gonna critique his shot diet, especially with how efficient he is on those shots. If he did change his shot diet, he would fill a considerable need for this team. Mm-hmm. And it would also create more playmaking opportunities for him. Because if he's getting to somewhere that isn't just the mid-range, he can force more collapsing in the paint, kick out, or shovel passes to dump off to the big or what have you. I have more issues or more concerns about his handle also, but just I don't think that he's like quite there yet overall as a secondary shot creator, just because of just kind of the overall limitation on that skill set. And part of it is the shot diet. And it's not just J-Dub, it's really the whole team.
They're still developing for as good as they are. And we don't necessarily know how J-Dub, for example, like you're talking about, is going to develop in these manners. And if he can put that into his game, then the offense as a whole is going to know more how to utilize them to solve certain problems. And just right now they're kind of figuring that out, especially in like a more competitive game in this NBA Cup final against a team with the Bucks, who obviously are way more comfortable in what they want to do because Giannis has been on the team for forever, and a lot of these pieces have as well. Even though Dame's somewhat new, he's a vet. He knows how to like solve problems. So it's just like it was an interesting comparison.
And he's a point guard is the other thing. Like Shea is the point guard of this team, but he's more of a shooting guard. He's he's one of those like trying to reclaim the glory of the combo guard guys that's going through this transformation of like, now that I'm the primary on this team, I'm not just concerned with getting my own shot. I'm concerned with getting other guys' shots. But part of that is also understanding like shot diet. And that's the difference. Yeah. Like I really think that's such a crucial difference in the kind of development of traditional point guards compared to combo guards that might like play some point at some point in their careers. either early or once they get to the NBA or what have you. Being concerned with like getting guys in the spots that work for them, and also knowing how important the overall shot diet of the team is. That's why like you look at a guy like Mike Conley, you look at a guy like even Tyus Jones, even Russell Westbrook, and we talked about this over the summer, the importance of playing with pace and it's not just about like Steve Nash was, renowned for this, like legendary for it, created like some of the best offenses of all time just by playing with pace. And it wasn't just about like you getting down the floor quickly, but the ball getting down the floor quickly. And I'm not even saying that the Thunder don't do this, but I'm just pointing to it as an example of one thing that is always on the mind of one of these like table setter point guards, unless you're like a Chris Paul type who's like the getting everybody in their spots guy. Like there's different ways to create baseline efficiency for your team, but it's more about creating baseline efficiency for your team and not just creating like efficient shots for you and like thinking on like a one possession at a time like basis. And I think that is the difference between traditional point guards and some of these guys. And, traditional point guards have their limitations as well. They're not often like star scorers. Ja Morant is like an anomaly. We've seen Trey Young take a serious step back with his scoring this season. It's difficult to do both, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what we see. And I think that's just, an appreciation for the other side of that equation is one of my takeaways from this game. Last thing that I just wanted to say about this, same takeaway that I had after the Mavs series is I was wrong 95% of the way when it comes to OKC's defense. It is playoff ready, even though I think there are certain things that do present issues for them. I think Jokic is an issue for them. I think Giannis is an issue for them for sure. If they ever met up with like Philly in the finals, I think that Embiid would be an issue for them. It's their offense that concerns me more. And it's like, like you and I both talked about, just the recurring issues with I think it's more like roster than scheme. Like drive and kick can get you pretty far, but I think they don't actually have the optimal personnel for it around Shea to keep up a high level drive and kick offense against a playoff level defense. And that's what happens when you have such a tiny team.
They're just not going to it enough, and I don't even know that they can execute it well enough at a high level yet.
It's a really hard style to keep up for 48 minutes as your bread and butter.
Yeah, and on their defense, I agree with you. They have a very good defense. I think if I had to pick,
they had a 102 defensive rating in this game. The problem was they had an 83 offensive rating.
But yeah, I think the perimeter defense and like speed is a very strong point in regards to their defense. And they're, it's not like they're horrible in the paint, but it's not as strong as the perimeter. And guarding the perimeter is super valuable in the NBA right now, which is why their defense was so incredibly amazing.
They also have like the highest turnover or steal rate, I guess, in NBA history. So that definitely helps.
Yeah, you got to not turn the ball over against them. Listeners, thank you so much for spending the time and hanging out with us. If you haven't subscribed and you're watching this and you liked what you saw, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing so you don't miss future shows, because we're going to be breaking down Nuggets games and with trade season coming up, giving our takes on all the interesting gossip. Follow us on Spotify and Apple Music and Amazon Music, where you can leave a review, and also on Instagram and TikTok and the Clip channel, where we're uploading snippets from the show. Remember, winning is fun and losing always sucks.
Sure does. But winning is awesome.